The blood on Madeline Redmond's hands wasn't her own, but it might as well have been for all the accusations that flew through Central City, Colorado, that cold spring morning in 1876. Scrubbing her trembling fingers against her apron, she stared into the angry faces of the town council gathered on the church steps, their judgment already decided long before the first ray of sunlight had broken over the Rocky Mountains. Witchcraft, Reverend Holloway spat, his gaunt face twisted with disgust. Using unholy remedies to interfere with God's will. I was only trying to save Mrs. Peterson and her baby, Madeline pleaded, her voice barely audible above the murmurs of the gathering crowd. The bleeding wouldn't stop. I used the herbs my grandmother taught me, and now both mother and child are dead, the banker, Mr. Collins, shouted, his jowls quivering with righteous indignation. Just like the Wilkins boy last winter, Madeline flinched at the mention of young Thomas Wilkins. She had tried everything to break his fever, but nothing had worked. His death had marked the beginning of the whispers, the sideways glances, the doors that closed as she passed by. The council has made its decision, Reverend Holloway announced, unfolding a piece of paper with ceremonial gravity. Madeline Redmond, you are hereby cast out from Central City. You have until sundown to gather your belongings and leave. Should you ever return, you will face imprisonment or worse. You cannot do this, Madeline protested, tears welling in her eyes. This is my home. Where am I to go? That is not our concern, Mayor Henderson replied coldly. Perhaps you should consult whatever unholy spirits guide your hand. Stunned into silence, Madeline turned to the faces in the crowd, neighbors she'd known her entire life, children she'd helped bring into the world, miners whose broken bones she'd set. Not a single sympathetic glance met hers, even Mrs. Abernathy, whose life Madeline had saved during a difficult childbirth just last summer, turned away in shame. 4 hours later, Madeline stood at the edge of town, a small carpet bag containing her few possessions in one hand and her mother's worn Bible in the other. The 22-year-old had never ventured more than 10 miles from Central City in her entire life. The daughter of the town's previous healer, she had inherited her mother's knowledge of herbs and remedies, along with her gentle touch and unwavering faith. Now that same knowledge had branded her a witch. The Lord is my shepherd, she whispered, fingers tracing the embossed letters on the Bible's cover. I shall not want. But want she did for understanding, for fairness, for the comfort of the only home she'd ever known. The crisp mountain air bit at her cheeks as she took her first steps away from Central City, each one more uncertain than the last. The spring days were still short, and Madeline had no illusions about surviving a night in the mountains without shelter. She headed south along the rough trail that would eventually lead to Denver, hoping to reach a wayside inn before darkness fell. Her practical boots, at least, were sturdy enough for walking, though her dress and shawl offered little protection against the cool air. As the sun began its descent behind the jagged peaks, Madeline's steps grew heavier. The small settlement she'd hoped to find remained elusive, and the familiar fear of mountain predators grew with each passing shadow. When she spotted smoke rising above the trees in the distance, relief flooded through her tired body. It wasn't a settlement but a single cabin, nestled against a rocky outcropping. A small corral held 3 horses, and the smell of cooking meat made her empty stomach clench painfully. Gathering her courage, Madeline approached the cabin door and knocked. "Who's there?" a gruff voice called from inside. "A traveler seeking shelter for the night," she answered, trying to keep her voice steady. "I can pay." This was a lie. The few coins in her purse would barely buy a loaf of bread. The door swung open to reveal a tall man with sun-weathered skin and watchful eyes the color of a summer sky. His dark blonde hair fell carelessly across his forehead, and a week's worth of stubble covered his jaw. A gun belt hung low on his hips. "You're a long way from anywhere, miss," he said, his eyes taking in her disheveled appearance and the small bag clutched in her hand. "I'm traveling to Denver," Madeline replied, lifting her chin slightly. The man leaned against the doorframe, skepticism written across his features. "Denver's still 30 miles south. You planning to walk the whole way?" Before Madeline could answer, exhaustion and hunger conspired against her. The world tilted alarmingly, and she felt herself falling forward. Strong hands caught her before she hit the ground, and the last thing she remembered was being lifted as if she weighed nothing at all. When Madeline awoke, she was lying on a narrow cot, a rough woolen blanket tucked around her. The cabin's interior was simple but neat: a stone fireplace where a pot bubbled, a table with 2 chairs, shelves holding provisions and books, surprisingly many books. The man sat at the table, cleaning a rifle with methodical precision. "You back with the living?" he asked, not looking up from his work. Madeline pushed herself to a sitting position, mortified. "I'm so sorry, I haven't eaten since yesterday," he nodded toward the fireplace. "Stew's almost ready, nothing fancy, but it'll put some strength back in you." "Thank you, Mr. Tucker." "Thomas Tucker, most folks just call me Tucker." He set aside the rifle and stood, moving to the fireplace to stir the pot. "And you are Madeline Redmond." She hesitated, then added, "I was the healer in Central City." "Was." Tucker ladled stew into a bowl and handed it to her along with a spoon and a chunk of bread. Madeline accepted the food gratefully. "I've been cast out. They believe I practice witchcraft because some of my patients died despite my care." Tucker's eyebrows rose, but he didn't comment, just poured himself a bowl and sat back at the table. Madeline took a tentative spoonful of the stew, simple but flavorful, with chunks of venison and wild onions. "So you're heading to Denver with nothing but that little bag?" Tucker finally asked. "And my faith," Madeline replied, touching the Bible that lay beside her. Tucker snorted. "Faith won't buy you a meal or a roof in Denver." "It's all I have left," she said softly. Tucker studied her for a long moment, then shook his head. "Finish your stew, you can sleep here tonight. I'll take you as far as Idaho Springs tomorrow. You might find work there." "You're very kind, Mr. Tucker." "Don't mistake necessity for kindness, Miss Redmond. Night's coming on, and I wasn't raised to turn women away to freeze or get eaten by mountain lions." Despite his gruff words, Madeline sensed a fundamental decency in the man. He might not be friendly, but he wasn't unkind. After the hatred she'd faced in Central City, his matter-of-fact assistance was a balm to her wounded spirit. After dinner, Tucker gave her a spare shirt to sleep in and turned his back politely while she changed behind a hanging blanket that partitioned off a small section of the cabin. The shirt hung to her knees, smelling of sunshine and pine soap. Tucker made himself a pallet by the fire, insisting she take the cot. "Are you a hunter, Mr. Tucker?" Madeline asked, gesturing to the rifles mounted on the wall. "Sometimes." He stoked the fire. "I do whatever work pays: hunting, guiding, breaking horses." "Spent some time as a cavalry scout during the war. You've led an adventurous life." Tucker shrugged. "Just a life, nothing special about it." Madeline thought there must be many stories behind his laconic answers, but exhaustion was pulling at her again. She murmured a good night and was asleep almost before her head touched the pillow. Morning brought bright sunshine and the smell of coffee. Madeline woke to find Tucker already dressed and cooking flapjacks on a griddle. Her dress, she noticed, had been laid out near the fire to remove the dampness from yesterday's exertion. "There's water in that basin if you want to wash up," Tucker said without turning around. "We'll head out after breakfast." Madeline slipped behind the partition to wash and dress quickly. When she emerged, Tucker placed a plate of flapjacks drizzled with honey before her. "Thank you again for your hospitality, Mr. Tucker," he grunted in acknowledgement, sitting across from her with his own plate. "How'd you come to be a healer anyway? You seem awful young." "My mother was the healer before me. She taught me everything she knew about herbs and healing before she passed 3 years ago." Madeline cut a small piece of flapjack. "I was doing well until the Wilkins boy died last winter, then Mrs. Peterson and her baby 2 days ago. The town needed someone to blame. People fear what they don't understand," Tucker said, "especially when death's involved. I understand their grief, I just wish." She trailed off, blinking back unexpected tears. "Wish they hadn't turned on you like a pack of wolves," Tucker finished for her. Madeline nodded, unable to speak. Tucker finished his breakfast in silence, then rose to clear the plates. "We should get moving. Got a spare horse you can ride. She's gentle enough." An hour later, they were making their way along the trail that wound through the mountains toward Idaho Springs. Tucker rode a tall chestnut gelding while Madeline perched somewhat uneasily on a smaller bay mare. Her carpet bag was secured behind her saddle and her Bible tucked safely in a saddlebag. "Have you been to Idaho Springs before?" Madeline asked, trying to distract herself from her precarious position. She'd ridden occasionally in Central City, but was far from comfortable on horseback. "Passed through a few times. It's a mining town like most around here, rough but growing. They might need someone with healing skills." Madeline felt a flutter of hope at his words. Perhaps this banishment could become a new beginning. They rode for several hours, the trail sometimes widening enough to allow them to ride side by side, other times narrowing until they had to proceed in single file. Tucker was mostly silent, but occasionally he would point out landmarks or name the wildflowers that were beginning to bloom alongside the trail. Around midday, they stopped by a stream to rest the horses and eat the bread and dried meat Tucker had packed. Madeline stretched her sore legs, wincing. "You'll toughen up," Tucker commented, noticing her discomfort. "First day's always the worst." "I'm afraid I'm not much of a horsewoman," Madeline admitted. "You're doing fine." Tucker handed her a canteen. "We should reach Idaho Springs by sundown." As they continued their journey, dark clouds began gathering over the mountains. Tucker eyed them warily. "Weather's turning. We might need to pick up the pace." The first fat drops of rain began to fall just as a fork of lightning split the sky, followed by a deafening crack of thunder. The bay mare shied nervously, and Madeline clutched the saddle horn to keep her seat. "There's an old line shack about a mile ahead," Tucker called over the rising wind. "We can wait out the storm there." They urged the horses to a faster pace, but within minutes, the rain was coming down in blinding sheets. By the time the dilapidated shack came into view, they were both soaked to the skin. Tucker dismounted quickly and helped Madeline down, then led the horses to a lean-to attached to the side of the shack. Inside, the line shack was dusty but intact. A small iron stove stood in one corner, and Tucker quickly set about gathering scraps of wood to start a fire. "Take off that wet dress before you catch your death," he instructed, turning his back to give her privacy. "Wrap yourself in one of those blankets on the shelf. I'll hang your dress to dry." Madeline did as he suggested, shivering as she peeled off the sodden garment. The blanket was rough against her skin, but blessedly dry. Tucker, she noticed, had also stripped off his wet shirt and hung it beside the stove, leaving him in an undershirt that revealed surprisingly muscular arms for a man who appeared so lean in his usual attire. As the small space began to warm, Tucker rummaged in his saddlebags and produced a flask. "Whiskey," he explained, offering it to her. "Just a sip. It'll warm you up." Madeline hesitated, then accepted the flask, taking a tiny swallow that burned all the way down. Coughing, she handed it back, and Tucker grinned, the first real smile she'd seen from him. "Not much of a drinker, I take it. My mother believed alcohol was best used for medicinal tinctures, not drinking." Tucker took a more substantial swallow before recapping the flask. "Your mother sounds like a sensible woman." She was. Madeline pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. She would have known how to save Mrs. Peterson and her baby. Tucker regarded her thoughtfully. "Sometimes people die no matter what you do. That's not on you." "Try telling that to Reverend Holloway and the town council," Madeline replied bitterly. They needed a scapegoat. The rain drummed steadily on the roof as they sat in companionable silence, the small stove casting flickering shadows on the walls. Eventually, Tucker produced more dried meat and hard biscuits from his saddlebags, and they made a simple meal. "Doesn't look like this rain is letting up anytime soon," he observed as darkness fell outside. "We'll have to stay the night." Madeline nodded, trying to hide her nervousness at the thought of spending the night in such close quarters with a man she barely knew. Tucker seemed to read her thoughts. "You take that corner," he said, indicating the spot furthest from the door. "I'll sleep here by the stove." "No need to worry about propriety. I've got no designs on you, Miss Redmond." His directness brought a flush to Madeline's cheeks, but also reassured her. She arranged her blanket in the designated corner and lay down, listening to the rain and the occasional rumble of thunder. "Mr. Tucker," she said after a while. Why are you helping me? You could have sent me on my way this morning." There was a long pause before he answered. "Let's just say I know what it's like to be judged unfairly." The cryptic response raised more questions than it answered, but Madeline sensed he wouldn't elaborate further. "Well, thank you," she said softly. "Your kindness means more than you know." Tucker grunted in response, and soon his breathing deepened into the steady rhythm of sleep. Despite her exhaustion, Madeline lay awake for some time, wondering what twist of fate had led her to this strange situation, cast out from her home with nothing but her faith, now dependent on the goodwill of a taciturn stranger. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," her mother used to say. Perhaps this was one of those mysteries. With that thought, Madeline finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. Morning brought clearing skies and the realization that the stream they'd crossed yesterday had swollen to a raging torrent overnight. Tucker stood on the bank, hands on his hips, assessing the situation with a frown. "We can't cross here," he announced when Madeline joined him. "We'll have to head upriver a few miles, find a narrower crossing." "Will that delay us much?" Madeline asked, concerned. "We won't make Idaho Springs today," Tucker replied. "Might have to spend another night on the trail." They set off along the riverbank, the ground muddy and treacherous from the previous night's downpour. The horses picked their way carefully, and more than once Tucker had to dismount to lead them around particularly difficult spots. By midday, they had found a place where the river narrowed enough to attempt a crossing. Tucker tested the depth carefully before leading Madeline's mare across, the water rising to the horses' bellies but not higher. On the opposite bank, they paused to rest and eat. "You said you know what it's like to be judged unfairly," Madeline ventured, curiosity getting the better of her. "What did you mean by that?" Tucker stared into the distance, and for a moment Madeline thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed. "I was accused of something I didn't do during the war. Desertion. Spent 6 months in a military prison before the truth came out." "That's terrible," Madeline said softly. "It was a long time ago." Tucker shrugged, but the set of his shoulders told a different story. "Point is, I know how it feels to have folks turn on you without hearing your side. Is that why you live alone, away from town?" A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Partly, also like the quiet, people talk too much." Madeline couldn't help but smile back. "Present company included, you're not so bad," Tucker allowed. "At least you ask interesting questions." They continued their journey through the afternoon, following a trail that wound higher into the mountains before beginning its descent toward Idaho Springs. The landscape was breathtaking, towering pines, dramatic rock formations, and glimpses of snow-capped peaks in the distance. As evening approached, Tucker led them to a small clearing sheltered by a stand of aspens. "We'll camp here tonight," he announced, dismounting. "Should reach Idaho Springs by midday tomorrow." He went about the business of making camp with practiced efficiency, unsaddling the horses and setting up a small fire ring. Madeline helped where she could, gathering fallen branches for firewood and laying out their meager provisions. As darkness fell, they sat beside the fire, the warmth a welcome respite from the cooling mountain air. Tucker produced a small pouch of coffee from his saddlebags and set a pot to boil at the edge of the flames. "Tell me about your plans for Idaho Springs," he said, surprising Madeline with his interest. "I haven't thought much beyond finding work and a place to stay," she admitted. "Perhaps I could find employment as a maid or laundress while I look for healing work." Tucker nodded. "Mining towns always need healers. Men get injured in the mines all the time, but you might want to be careful about advertising your herbal remedies given what happened in Central City." "You're right," Madeline sighed. "I'll have to be discreet." They drank their coffee in companionable silence, watching the stars emerge in the clear night sky. Madeline found herself studying Tucker's profile, illuminated by the firelight. Despite his rough exterior, there was something compelling about him, a quiet strength and integrity that she found increasingly attractive. "What about you, Mr. Tucker?" she asked, What are your plans after Idaho Springs? Haven't decided yet. He tossed the dregs of his coffee into the fire. Might head down to Denver, see about work there. Winter's coming on, and I don't fancy spending it alone in that cabin. The thought of parting ways with him in Idaho Springs left Madeline with an unexpected pang of regret. In just 2 days, she had come to rely on his steady presence, his practical approach to problems, his unspoken support. I should thank you properly for all your help, she said. I don't have much money, but perhaps when I find work, Tucker waved her off. Don't need payment. Just doing what anyone would do. No, Madeline said firmly. Not anyone would do this. Most people in Central City were happy to see me go, even people I'd helped. Your kindness is special. Tucker looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. Get some sleep, Miss Redmond. We've got an early start tomorrow. Madeline recognized the dismissal, but couldn't help feeling there was something more he wasn't saying. She arranged her blanket near the fire and lay down, but sleep remained elusive. Across the fire, Tucker sat with his back against a tree, rifle across his lap, keeping watch. Aren't you going to sleep? She asked after a while. Someone needs to keep an eye out. Mountain lions, bears, they're curious about fires. We could take turns. Tucker's mouth quirked in a half-smile. No offense, Miss Redmond, but I don't think you'd know what to do if a bear wandered into camp. I could wake you, she suggested. I'm fine. Used to going without sleep. Get some rest. Madeline wanted to argue further, but sensed it would be futile. Instead, she closed her eyes and tried to quiet her mind, listening to the crackling of the fire and the soft sounds of night creatures in the surrounding forest. When she woke, dawn was breaking, pale light filtering through the aspen leaves. Tucker was already up, brewing more coffee and frying strips of bacon over the rekindled fire. He looked none the worse for his night of vigilance, though Madeline suspected he had dozed at some point. Morning, he greeted her. Hungry. They ate quickly and broke camp, eager to reach Idaho Springs. The trail descended steadily now, offering occasional views of the valley below. By mid-morning, they could see smoke rising from chimneys in the distance. That's Idaho Springs, Tucker confirmed when Madeline pointed it out. As they rode closer, Madeline could make out the scattered buildings of a growing mining town, wooden structures ranging from crude shacks to more substantial businesses along what appeared to be a main street. The constant clang of mining operations echoed from the surrounding hillsides. It's bigger than I expected, she commented. Gold and silver bring people, Tucker replied. Town's grown a lot in the last few years. They reached the outskirts of Idaho Springs just before noon, passing miners' cabins and small homesteads before reaching the more established part of town. Unlike Central City's orderly layout, Idaho Springs had grown organically, buildings sprouting wherever space allowed. Tucker led them to a modest establishment with a sign proclaiming it the Silver Dollar Hotel and Dining. He dismounted and helped Madeline down, then tied the horses to a hitching post. Let's get some proper food, he suggested. Then we can see about finding you a place to stay and maybe some work. The dining room was half full, mostly with miners taking their midday meal. The patrons glanced curiously at Madeline and Tucker before returning to their conversations. A harried-looking woman in her 50s approached their table, wiping her hands on a stained apron. What'll it be? She asked, eyeing them with mild interest. Whatever's hot, Tucker replied, and coffee. Same for me, please, Madeline added politely. The woman nodded and bustled away. Tucker leaned back in his chair, surveying the room with a practiced eye. Seems like a decent enough place, he remarked. Busy, which means there's money flowing. Do you think I'll find work here? Madeline asked, nervousness creeping into her voice now that their journey was ending. Before Tucker could answer, the serving woman returned with 2 plates of stew and corn bread, along with mugs of coffee. You folks just passing through? She asked as she set down their meal. The ladies looking for work, Tucker replied. Just arrived from up north. The woman's eyes narrowed slightly as she assessed Madeline. What kind of work you do, honey? I'm trained as a healer, Madeline said hesitantly, but I'm willing to do any honest work, cleaning, cooking, sewing. A healer, eh? The woman's expression sharpened with interest. We lost our doctor last month, moved to Denver for a fancier practice. Nearest doctor now is 10 miles away. Town could use someone with healing skills. She extended her hand. I'm Martha, by the way. I own this place with my husband, Frank, Madeline Redmond. They shook hands. I don't have formal medical training, just knowledge of herbal remedies and basic care. That's more than we've got now, Martha said pragmatically. Tell you what, we've got a small room above the kitchen that's sitting empty. You can have it in exchange for helping out here and tending to folks who need healing. If it works out, we can talk about proper wages later. Madeline's heart leaped at the unexpected offer. That's very generous of you, Mrs. Just Martha, and it's not generosity, it's practicality. I'm short-handed since my last girl ran off with a minor headed to Leadville. She glanced at Tucker. Your husband's staying too? Oh no, Madeline said quickly, feeling her cheeks warm. Mr. Tucker is just a friend who escorted me here. We're not married. Martha raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. Well, finish your meal and come find me when you're ready. I'll show you the room. As Martha walked away, Madeline turned to Tucker, unable to contain her excitement. Can you believe it? A place to stay and work on my very first day here? Tucker smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. Told you things would work out. I feel like this is a sign, Madeline said, touching the Bible she'd kept in her pocket, that I'm meant to be here, could be. Tucker took a bite of stew, chewing thoughtfully. Seems like a stroke of luck at any rate. They finished their meal in relative silence, Madeline's mind racing with possibilities, Tucker more reserved than usual. When they were done, he insisted on paying for both their meals despite Madeline's protests. Consider it a welcome to Idaho Springs gift, he said, placing coins on the table. Outside, Tucker untied the horses and led them toward the livery stable at the end of the street. Madeline walked beside him, suddenly reluctant for their time together to end. This man had been her lifeline when she'd had nothing, and the thought of him riding away left her feeling strangely bereft. Mr. Tucker Thomas, she began, using his first name for the first time. I don't know how to thank you enough for everything you've done. Tucker kept his eyes on the road ahead. No need for thanks, just doing what's right. Will you be leaving for Denver today? The question felt weighted with far more significance than it should. Probably not. He glanced at her briefly. Need to rest the horses, might stay a day or two. Relief flooded through Madeline, though she tried not to show it. Perhaps I could cook you a proper meal tomorrow night to repay your kindness. Tucker's expression softened slightly. Don't have to repay anything, but I wouldn't say no to a home-cooked meal. At the livery, Tucker arranged for his horses to be stabled and cared for, then collected Madeline's carpet bag from the saddle. They walked back to the Silver Dollar in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Martha was waiting for them, keys in hand. Room's this way, she said, leading them through the kitchen and up a narrow staircase. It's small but clean. Used to be where our daughter stayed before she got married and moved to Denver. The room was indeed small, with just enough space for a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chest of drawers. A small window overlooked the back alley, but the space was, as Martha had promised, spotlessly clean. It's perfect, Madeline said sincerely. Thank you. You can start tomorrow morning, Martha told her. Breakfast service begins at 6. Now I'll leave you to get settled. With a knowing glance between Madeline and Tucker, she added, Take your time saying goodbye to your friend. When Martha had gone, Madeline set her carpet bag on the bed and turned to Tucker, who stood awkwardly by the door. Well, he said, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, looks like you're all set. Thanks to you. Madeline stepped closer, impulsively taking his hand. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't taken me in that night. Tucker's hand was warm and calloused in hers, and he didn't pull away. You'd have managed. Seems to me you're the type who lands on her feet. I wasn't feeling very capable when you found me. Tucker's blue eyes met hers, and something in them made Madeline's heart beat faster. You were exhausted and hungry, that's all. You've got more strength than you know, Madeline. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with cold. Will you really stay in town for a few days? She asked softly. Said I would, didn't I? A hint of a smile touched his lips. Besides, I want to make sure you're settled proper before I move on. Madeline nodded, reluctantly releasing his hand. I should let you go find your own lodgings. The hotel across the street looked respectable. Tucker stepped back, clearing his throat. I'll check on you tomorrow. Make sure everything's working out with Martha. I'd like that. With a nod, Tucker turned and left, his footsteps echoing down the narrow staircase. Madeline sat on the edge of the bed, her emotions a confusing tangle. In just 3 days, Thomas Tucker had become important to her in ways she couldn't fully articulate. The thought of him leaving made her chest ache, yet she had no right to ask him to stay. Faith and patience, she murmured to herself, echoing her mother's favorite advice. Whatever was meant to happen would happen in its own time. The next morning dawned bright and clear, and Madeline was up before sunrise, eager to begin her new life in Idaho Springs. She dressed carefully in her one good dress, brushed her hair until it shone, and made her way down to the kitchen where Martha was already preparing for the breakfast service. "There you are," Martha greeted her. "Hope you slept well. We've got miners coming in soon, hungry as bears." "You ever wait tables before?" "No, but I'm a quick learner," Madeline assured her. Martha handed her an apron. "Put this on, I'll show you what to do." The breakfast rush was chaotic but exhilarating. Madeline moved between tables, taking orders, delivering plates, and pouring endless cups of coffee. The miners were a boisterous lot, but mostly polite, especially after Martha sharply reprimanded a young man who made a suggestive comment as Madeline passed by. "Girls under my protection," Martha announced loudly. "Anyone who bothers her answers to me and Frank." She patted the shotgun mounted behind the counter for emphasis, and the miners nodded respectfully. By mid-morning the crowd had thinned, and Madeline was wiping down tables when Tucker walked in. Her heart gave a little skip at the sight of him, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt. "Morning," he greeted her, taking a seat at a corner table. "Looks like you're settling in." "It's been wonderful," Madeline replied, unable to keep the smile from her face. "Martha's been very kind and the work isn't too difficult. Glad to hear it." Tucker glanced around the nearly empty dining room. "Thought I might explore the town today, get a feel for the place." "Would you like to join me when you're done here?" The invitation surprised and delighted her. "I'd love to, but I'm not sure when Martha will need me again." "Take the afternoon," Martha called from behind the counter where she'd obviously been listening. "Get to know the town." "Just be back to help with supper." Tucker grinned. "Seems it's settled then." After Tucker had eaten and Madeline had finished her morning duties, they set out to explore Idaho Springs. The town was indeed growing rapidly, with new buildings under construction along the main street and side roads being cleared for more development. They visited the general store, where Tucker insisted on buying Madeline a warm shawl for the cool mountain evenings. They strolled past the assay office, the blacksmith shop, and several saloons before stopping to watch a group of men working on the foundation of what would become the town's first bank. "Place has promise," Tucker commented as they continued their walk. "Could be as big as Central City in a few years." "It seems friendlier somehow," Madeline observed. "Less rigid. Mining towns often are. People come from everywhere bringing different ways, makes for less judgment sometimes." They paused by a small creek that ran through the edge of town, finding a fallen log to sit on. The water bubbled over rocks, creating a soothing melody that complemented the distant sounds of the town. "Have you decided how long you'll stay in Idaho Springs?" Madeline asked, trying to keep her tone casual. Tucker picked up a small stone and tossed it into the creek, watching the ripples spread. "Thought I might look into work at the livery. Owner mentioned they need someone good with horses." Madeline's pulse quickened. "So you're considering staying longer than a few days?" "Might." Tucker glanced at her, then back at the creek. "If there's reason enough." The implication hung between them, neither quite ready to acknowledge it directly. Madeline stared at her hands, uncertain how to respond but feeling a warm glow of hope. "I'd like it if you stayed," she finally said softly. "It would be nice to have a friend here." "A friend?" Tucker repeated, something unreadable in his expression. "Yeah, I suppose it would." They sat in companionable silence for a while longer before Tucker rose, offering her his hand. Should probably get you back. Don't want to get on Martha's bad side your first day. Madeline took his hand, feeling the strength in it as he helped her up. Neither of them seemed in any hurry to let go, and for a moment they stood close enough that she could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes. "Thank you for today," she said, voice barely above a whisper, "for everything." Tucker's gaze dropped briefly to her lips before he stepped back, releasing her hand. "We should go," he said, his voice rougher than usual. The walk back to the silver dollar was quieter, both of them aware of the subtle shift in the air between them. At the hotel entrance, Tucker paused. "I'll see you tomorrow," Madeline asked, hope coloring her voice. "Count on it," Tucker replied with a small smile. "Good night, Madeline. Good night, Thomas." The next few weeks fell into a pattern that grew increasingly comfortable. Madeline worked at the Silver Dollar, quickly becoming indispensable to Martha with her efficient service and gentle manner with customers. Word of her healing skills spread gradually, and soon miners and townspeople alike were seeking her out for remedies and care. Tucker, true to his word, took a job at the livery stable, where his way with horses earned him the respect of the owner and the townspeople who brought their animals to be shod or treated. He took his meals at the Silver Dollar whenever Madeline was working, and they spent most evenings together, sometimes walking through town, other times simply sitting in the hotel's small parlor, talking or reading. Martha watched their developing friendship with knowing eyes, but made no comment beyond an occasional raised eyebrow when Tucker lingered later than usual. Frank, her taciturn husband, merely grunted that Tucker seemed decent enough, which Madeline gathered was high praise indeed. As April gave way to May, the mountain spring bursting into full bloom around them, Madeline found herself happier than she'd been in years. The shadow of her banishment from Central City began to fade, replaced by the warmth of new friendships and the growing certainty that she belonged in Idaho Springs. And then there was Tucker. Steady, reliable Tucker, who never pushed for more than she was ready to give, but whose eyes followed her whenever she entered a room. Tucker, who brought her wildflowers he'd found on his rides into the hills, and who listened with genuine interest when she spoke of her mother's teachings or her hopes for the future. On a particularly fine Sunday in late May, Tucker suggested they take a picnic into the hills above town. Martha, with an enigmatic smile, packed them a basket of cold chicken, bread, and apple pie, along with a bottle of lemonade. They rode double on Tucker's gelding, Madeline seated in front of him, hyper-aware of his arms around her as he held the reins. The trail wound upward through stands of aspen and pine until they reached a meadow carpeted with wildflowers. "This is beautiful," Madeline breathed as Tucker helped her down from the horse. "How did you find it?" "Came up here last week looking for strays from the livery," Tucker replied, spreading a blanket on the grass. "Thought you might like it." They ate their picnic in the dappled sunlight, talking easily about the town, the people they'd met, the changes coming with the arrival of more settlers and businesses. When they'd finished, Tucker stretched out on the blanket, hat over his eyes, while Madeline gathered wildflowers, weaving them into a simple crown. "Thomas," she said after a while, sitting beside him on the blanket. He lifted his hat, squinting up at her. "Are you happy here?" "In Idaho Springs, I mean." Tucker considered the question, his expression thoughtful. "Happier than I've been in a long time," he finally answered. "Got steady work, a decent place to sleep, good food." He paused, then added more softly, "good company." Madeline smiled, pleased by his answer but sensing there was more he wasn't saying. "I've been thinking about something Martha said yesterday, about putting down roots." Tucker sat up, his full attention on her now. "What about it?" She mentioned that doctor. "Miller's old office on Cedar Street is still vacant, said it might make a good place for a proper healing practice with living quarters upstairs." Madeline twisted a flower stem between her fingers. "She thinks I should consider it." "What do you think?" Tucker's voice was carefully neutral. "I think I'd like to stay in Idaho Springs, make it my home." She looked up at him, gathering her courage. "But I'd want to know if you were planning to stay too." The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever, though it could only have been seconds. Tucker's blue eyes searched hers, something vulnerable in their depths that she'd never seen before. "Madeline," he began, then stopped, as if uncertain how to continue. He reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I haven't had a real home since before the war. Never stayed in one place long enough to put down roots, never wanted to." Madeline's heart sank, but she nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "I understand. You're not obligated to let me finish," Tucker interrupted, taking her hand. "I never wanted to until now, until you." Hope bloomed in Madeline's chest, warm and bright. "What are you saying, Thomas?" "I'm saying that home isn't always a place." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "Sometimes it's a person." Tears pricked at Madeline's eyes as the meaning of his words sank in. "Are you saying I'm your home?" Instead of answering directly, Tucker leaned forward and kissed her a gentle, questioning kiss that quickly deepened as Madeline responded, her hand coming up to rest against his cheek. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Tucker rested his forehead against hers. "Been wanting to do that for weeks," he murmured. "Why didn't you?" Madeline asked, her voice unsteady. "Wasn't sure you felt the same, wasn't sure I deserved someone like you." Tucker's hand cupped her cheek. "Still not sure, but I can't seem to stay away." Madeline kissed him again, brief but certain. "I don't want you to stay away." They spent the afternoon in the meadow, talking more openly than ever before, sharing confidences, hopes, and fears. Tucker told her about his family in Missouri, lost to typhoid when he was just 17, and his subsequent years of drifting from place to place. Madeline spoke of her mother's final illness, her lonely years as Central City's healer, and her dreams of creating a true home again someday. As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, Tucker helped Madeline onto the horse and mounted behind her, his arms wrapped securely around her waist as they made their way back to town. The simple intimacy of the gesture felt different now, charged with new meaning and possibility. Martha took one look at their faces when they returned and smiled knowingly. "About time," she muttered as she took the picnic basket from Tucker. "Thought I might have to lock you two in the pantry together." The weeks that followed were the happiest of Madeline's life. By day, she continued her work at the Silver Dollar while developing her healing practice, using a small room at the back of the hotel that Martha had cleared for her use. By night, she and Tucker explored their deepening relationship, sometimes walking under the stars, sometimes sharing quiet conversations in the hotel parlor. Word of Madeline's healing skills continued to spread, and soon she was treating patients from dawn until dusk. Martha joked that she'd need to hire another waitress if Madeline kept disappearing to tend to miners with cuts and burns, or children with fevers and coughs. Tucker, meanwhile, had proven so valuable at the livery that the aging owner, Mr. Henderson, had begun discussing the possibility of Tucker taking over the business eventually. The idea of such permanence would have terrified Tucker months ago, but now he found himself seriously considering it. On a warm evening in early June, Tucker took Madeline to see Dr. Miller's old office on Cedar Street. The building was dusty from disuse but sound, with a spacious front room perfect for receiving patients, a smaller room that could serve as an apothecary, and comfortable living quarters upstairs. Martha was right, Madeline said as they explored the rooms. This would be perfect for a healing practice. "Could use some work," Tucker observed, testing a loose floorboard with his boot, but nothing that couldn't be fixed with a bit of effort. "It's more space than I need, really," Madeline commented, running her hand along the mantelpiece. "But I suppose the practice might grow." Tucker cleared his throat. "Or you might not be living here alone." Madeline turned to him, heart suddenly pounding. "What do you mean?" Tucker crossed the room to stand before her, taking both her hands in his. "I mean that I love you, Madeline Redmond. Have since that day by the creek, maybe even before, and if you'll have me, I'd like to build a life with you, here in Idaho Springs." Tears welled in Madeline's eyes as joy surged through her. "I love you too, Thomas, so much." Tucker pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left no doubt of his feelings. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers, his voice rough with emotion. "When I found you on my doorstep that night, exhausted and half-starved, all you had was your faith. Remember what I told you the next morning?" Madeline smiled through her tears. You said Faith wouldn't buy me a meal or a roof in Denver. Tucker shook his head, a wry smile tugging at his lips. Was wrong about that. Your faith led you to my door, led us both here. His expression grew serious. I may not be a religious man, Madeline, but I believe we were meant to find each other. So do I. She touched his face tenderly. Faith brought us together, and love will keep us that way. Tucker kissed her again, softer this time. Faith and me, he murmured against her lips. That's all you need. 2 weeks later, on a perfect June morning, Madeline Redmond became Madeline Tucker in a simple ceremony performed by the visiting circuit preacher. Martha and Frank stood as witnesses, along with Mr. Henderson from the livery and several other friends they'd made in Idaho Springs. The town turned out in force for the celebration afterward, the silver dollar overflowing with well-wishers eager to congratulate the healer and the horseman who'd both become valued members of their community in such a short time. As evening fell, Tucker led his bride to their new home, the former doctor's office on Cedar Street, now transformed with fresh paint, repaired floors, and furniture they'd purchased together. A brass plaque beside the door read M. Tucker, Healer, and below it, in smaller letters, T. Tucker, Livery and Horse Training. Welcome home, Mrs. Tucker, Thomas said, lifting Madeline into his arms to carry her across the threshold. Home, she repeated, arms around his neck as she gazed into the eyes of the man who'd saved her when she had nothing, who'd offered her everything when she least expected it. Faith brought me to your door that night, but love brought us here. Thomas set her gently on her feet inside their home, kissing her with tender passion. Faith and me, he whispered, echoing the words that had become their promise to each other. That's all you need. 1 year later, Madeline stood in the doorway of their home on Cedar Street, watching as Thomas approached on horseback, returning from a 3-day journey to Central City. Her heart quickened at the sight of him, his tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun. No matter how many times he returned from his travels, the joy of seeing him never diminished. As he dismounted and tied his horse to the hitching post, Madeline stepped out to meet him, her hand resting protectively on the gentle swell of her belly, their first child, due in the autumn. Welcome home, she called, smiling as his face lit up at the sight of her. Thomas crossed the distance between them in long strides, gathering her in his arms and kissing her thoroughly before dropping to one knee to press his lips to her belly. How are my two favorite people? He asked, rising to his feet again. Missing you, Madeline replied, leaning into his embrace. How was Central City? Thomas's expression grew more serious, different, smaller than I remembered. He guided her inside, his arm around her waist. The new mayor seems decent. More reasonable than Henderson was. Madeline had been nervous when Thomas proposed traveling to Central City to speak with the town council about clearing her name. Though she had found happiness and acceptance in Idaho Springs, the shadow of her banishment still haunted her at times. Thomas, ever protective, had insisted on going alone, unwilling to subject her to potential hostility in her condition. What did they say? She asked as they settled in their small parlor, Madeline pouring him a cup of coffee from the pot kept warm on the stove. Mayor Wilson was appalled when I told him the full story. Seems Reverend Holloway has been run out of town himself, got caught with his hand in the collection box. Thomas smiled grimly. Justice has a way of finding people eventually. And my banishment. Thomas took her hand, his expression softening. Officially rescinded, the council signed a formal apology acknowledging that your treatment was unjust and based on superstition rather than fact. He reached into his jacket and withdrew an official-looking document. It's all here in writing. Madeline took the paper with trembling hands, reading the formal words that restored her good name and the right to return to Central City if she wished. Tears welled in her eyes, not from joy at the prospect of return, but from the relief of vindication. I never thought I'd see this day, she whispered. Thank you, Thomas. He gathered her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. Don't thank me, this was long overdue. Besides, he added with a slight smile, I made it clear that Idaho Springs was fortunate to gain what Central City had foolishly cast aside. Madeline laughed softly, wiping away her tears. Did you really say that, more or less? Thomas's expression grew serious again. I also visited Mrs. Peterson's sister. Told her about the remedies you tried to save Emily and the baby. She remembered how her sister had refused proper bed rest against your advice. She always was stubborn, Madeline said softly, remembering the young mother who'd continued working in her garden despite a difficult pregnancy. Her sister knew that, said she never believed you were responsible. Thomas squeezed her hand. She asked me to give you this. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small silver locket. Madeline recognized it immediately. Emily Peterson had worn it every day, a gift from her husband before he died in a mining accident. She wanted you to have it, Thomas explained. Said Emily would have wanted you to know she never blamed you. Tears flowed freely down Madeline's cheeks as she accepted the precious token, opening it to reveal a tiny portrait of Emily and her husband on their wedding day. I never needed their forgiveness, she said, closing the locket carefully, but it means more than I can say to have it nonetheless. Thomas brushed away her tears with his thumb. You built a new life here, a better one, but I thought healing that old wound might bring you peace. You've given me so much more than peace, Thomas Tucker. Madeline leaned into his embrace. You've given me love, a home, a future. She guided his hand to rest on her belly where their child stirred beneath his touch. A family. Thomas's eyes, so often guarded in the early days of their acquaintance, now shone with unmasked love and wonder. And you've given me purpose, Madeline Tucker, a reason to stay in one place to build something lasting. As twilight deepened into night, they sat together in the gentle glow of the lamplight, talking of Thomas's journey, of the changes in Idaho Springs, of their hopes for their child. Madeline's healing practice had flourished over the past year, with patients coming from neighboring settlements to seek her remedies. Thomas had indeed taken over the livery, expanding it to include horse breeding and training, his reputation for fair dealing and exceptional horsemanship spreading throughout the county. Later, as they prepared for bed, Thomas watched Madeline brush her hair, the simple domestic ritual never failing to move him. Do you ever regret it? He asked suddenly. Being cast out from Central City, Madeline set down her brush, considering the question seriously. How could I regret what led me to you? She finally answered. If I hadn't been banished, I would never have knocked on your cabin door that night. We might never have met. Faith brought you to my door, Thomas reminded her, drawing her into his arms. And love kept me there. Madeline completed the familiar exchange, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. As they settled into bed, Madeline nestled against Thomas's side, his hand resting protectively over their growing child. Outside, the sounds of Idaho Springs at night, distant piano music from the saloon, the occasional whinny of a horse, the soft whisper of wind through the aspens created a lullaby of home. Faith and you, Madeline murmured sleepily, echoing the words that had become their talisman. That's all I need. Thomas pressed a kiss to her hair, gratitude for this unexpected life overwhelming him as it often did in quiet moments. That's all either of us needs, he whispered, now and always. As autumn painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Madeline gave birth to a healthy boy they named James Franklin Tucker, in honor of both Thomas's father and their friend Frank from the Silver Dollar. Martha, who had become like family to them both, served as midwife, her practical experience proving invaluable during the difficult delivery. He's got your eyes, Thomas marveled, cradling his son with a mixture of terror and adoration. And your stubbornness took his sweet time arriving. Madeline, exhausted but radiant, smiled up at her husband and son. He has your chin, and your timing waiting until you returned from that horse sale in Denver. The baby had indeed seemed determined to delay his arrival until Thomas returned from a 3-day journey to sell horses to the cavalry. He'd ridden into town just as Madeline's labor began in earnest, arriving home to find Martha already boiling water and laying out clean linens. In the weeks that followed, Madeline and Thomas adjusted to life with their newborn son. The healing practice continued, though at a reduced pace, with Madeline seeing only the most urgent cases while she recovered. Thomas took on more of the household duties, proving surprisingly adept at soothing the fussy infant in the middle of the night. "You're a natural," Madeline observed one evening, watching Thomas walk the floor with James, the baby's tiny head nestled against his father's broad shoulder. "Had plenty of experience with skittish colts," Thomas replied with a wink. "Same principle, slow movements and a calm voice." "Are you comparing our son to a horse?" Madeline tried to sound indignant but couldn't suppress her smile. "Both beautiful creatures who need gentle handling," Thomas defended himself, grinning as the baby settled into sleep against him. As winter descended on Idaho Springs, bringing snow and bitter cold, their small home became a haven of warmth and contentment. On Christmas Eve, they hosted a modest celebration for their closest friends Martha and Frank, Mr. Henderson from the livery, and several others who had become part of their extended family. "A toast," Frank announced, raising his glass of cider. "To the Tuckers, Thomas, Madeline, and young James. May your home always be as warm as it is tonight." "Hear, hear," the others echoed, glasses clinking. Later, after their guests had departed and James was sleeping soundly in his cradle, Thomas drew Madeline into his arms before the fireplace. "Happy?" he asked, his voice low in her ear. "Completely," she replied, leaning back against his chest. "I never imagined such happiness was possible." Thomas turned her in his arms to face him. "Remember that night on my cabin floor when you told me all you had left was your faith?" Madeline nodded, remembering her despair, how lost she had felt. "And you said faith wouldn't buy me a meal or a roof in Denver. I was wrong about a lot of things back then." Thomas brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Your faith led you exactly where you needed to go." "Led us both where we needed to be. Faith and you," Madeline whispered, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. "That's all I need. That's all I'll ever need." As the years passed, the Tucker family grew and prospered along with Idaho Springs. A daughter, Elizabeth Martha Tucker, joined them 2 years after James, followed by another son, Robert Thomas, 3 years later. Madeline's healing practice became an institution in the town, her remedies sought after throughout the county. Thomas expanded the livery into one of the largest horse trading operations in the territory, his reputation for fair dealing and quality stock bringing buyers from as far away as Denver and Cheyenne. On warm summer evenings, they would often sit on the porch of their home, long since expanded to accommodate their growing family, and watch their children play in the yard. Sometimes, when the day's work was done and the children were asleep, Thomas would saddle 2 horses and he and Madeline would ride to the meadow where they'd shared their first kiss, now their meadow in both their minds. "You ever wonder how different our lives might have been?" Madeline asked on one such evening as they sat among the wildflowers, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold. "If I hadn't been cast out of Central City, if I hadn't found your cabin that night," Thomas considered the question, his arm around her shoulders. "I try not to dwell on what might have been," he finally answered. "But I know I was heading nowhere good before you showed up, becoming more and more of a hermit, pulling away from people, from life. And I might have ended up in Denver alone, trying to make my way among strangers," Madeline said softly. "Instead, here we are." Thomas gestured to the valley below, where the lights of Idaho Springs were beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. "Home, family. A life better than anything I could have imagined for myself." Madeline leaned her head against his shoulder, contentment washing over her. "When I was at my lowest, cast out with nothing but my faith, you told me that faith and you were all I needed. You were right." "We were both right," Thomas corrected, turning to kiss her with the same tenderness he'd shown that first time in this very meadow. "Faith brought us together. Love kept us that way." As darkness fell completely, they mounted their horses for the ride home, where their children slept peacefully, where the fruits of their years together, their healing practice, their horse business, their place in the community awaited them. The path that had once seemed so uncertain now stretched behind them, marked by moments of joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge, all woven together into the tapestry of a life shared. "Faith and you," Madeline murmured as they approached their home, the familiar phrase carrying all the weight of their journey together. That's all I need. That's all either of us needs, Thomas replied, reaching across to take her hand as they rode side by side, now and always. And in that moment, as in countless moments before and countless yet to come, they knew it to be true that faith had brought them together when they needed each other most, and love had built a life neither could have imagined alone. Cast out with nothing but her faith, Madeline had found everything she needed in the arms of a solitary cowboy who'd opened his door on a cold spring night, and in doing so, opened his heart to a love that would last a lifetime.